The wedding of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII. Henry VIII is remembered as England's most married monarch, his 6 unions spanning from 1509 to 1543. But what were these weddings actually like? Modern royal weddings are synonymous with grand public celebrations, lavish processions, magnificent ceremonies in iconic venues like Westminster Abbey or St George's Chapel, and a Buckingham Palace balcony appearance. This tradition dates back only to Queen Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert in 1840. Before this, royal weddings, including those of Henry VIII, were often private, solemn occasions, held in royal chapels with little public display. When Henry VIII ascended to the English throne in April 1509, at just 17 years old, the political landscape of England was precarious. The Tudor dynasty, established by his father Henry VII, was still relatively new and far from secure. Surviving members of the rival House of York posed potential threats, their claims to the throne arguably stronger than Henry's own. The sceptre of the War of Roses, the bloody civil conflicts between York and Lancaster, continued to cast a long shadow. It was critical for the young king to cement his legitimacy by marrying and producing a male heir to secure the Tudor line. The obvious choice for Henry's bride was Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess to whom he had been betrothed since 1503. Catherine was not only a royal of impeccable lineage, the daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, but also the widow of Henry's elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. Her marriage to Arthur in 1501 had been intended to solidify an alliance between England and Spain, but Arthur's untimely death at just 15 years old had left Catherine a widow and a diplomatic loose end. For Henry's advisers, the match was ideal. Catherine brought with her a substantial dowry, much of which was already in English hands, and an alliance with Spain would bolster England's position against its traditional adversary, France. Her father, Ferdinand, strongly supported the union, emphasizing the political advantages that it would bring. Yet for all of these compelling reasons, Henry hesitated. Henry's reluctance to marry Catherine stemmed from a profound unease rooted in religious doctrine. Marriage to a brother's widow was explicitly forbidden in the Bible, in passages from Leviticus that warned such unions were cursed and childless. Catherine, however, insisted that her first marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, and Pope Julius II had granted a suspension, allowing her to marry Henry on these grounds. Despite assurances from the papacy, King Ferdinand and his own council, Henry's scruples lingered. Was it truly lawful in the eyes of God? His advisers, however, dismissed his concerns. We have the Pope's suspension, they argued. Will you be more scrupulous than he is? Ultimately, the political and dynastic advantages of the marriage proved too significant to ignore. Henry also professed deeper admiration and love for Catherine. Though 6 years his senior, she was described as beautiful with fair skin, long golden hair, and an air of dignity and grace befitting a queen. For the young and idealistic Henry, marrying Catherine became not only a duty, but also a chivalrous act of love and honour. One day in early June 1509, Henry arrived unannounced at Catherine's apartments in Greenwich Palace. Alone, he dismissed her attendants, raised her from her curtsy, and professed his love. He asked her to be his queen, and Catherine, delighted and relieved, accepted without hesitation. Henry and Catherine were married on the 11th of June 1509, the feast of St. Barnabas, in an intimate ceremony in Catherine's private chapel at Greenwich. William Wareham, the Archbishop of Canterbury, officiated. Catherine, symbolizing her purity, wore a gown of virginal white with her long hair cascading loose beneath a gold circlet. The wedding party was small and the occasion private, as was typical for royal weddings of the time. After the ceremony, the newlyweds and their guests attended a mass at the nearby chapel of the observant friars. Unlike some royal unions, there is no record of a public bedding ceremony, where the couple would traditionally be escorted to their bedchamber amid great fanfare. Nevertheless, there was no doubt the marriage was consummated that night, and Katherine became pregnant almost immediately, though the child, a daughter, was stillborn. 4 days later, on the 15th of June, Katherine was formally proclaimed Queen of England, making her first appearance at court in her new role. She adopted the pomegranate as her personal emblem, a symbol of fertility and hope for the Tudor dynasty. Despite her early pregnancies, Katherine would endure immense personal sorrow. Of the 6 children that she bore, only one, Mary, survived infancy. Initially, Henry and Catherine's union seemed a harmonious blend of love and duty. Catherine's charm, intelligence, and devout nature made her an ideal partner for a king who valued these qualities. Yet the marriage's inability to produce a male heir cast a long shadow over their relationship. By 1524, it was clear Katherine could bear no more children. This realization, combined with Henry's growing frustrations, marked the beginning of the marriage's decline. In 1526, Henry became infatuated with Anne Boleyn, one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting. Anne was everything Katherine was not: young, ambitious, and politically shrewd. By 1527, Henry began to voice doubts about the validity of his marriage to Katherine, citing the very scriptural prohibitions that had troubled him years earlier. He sought an annulment from the Pope, claiming their union was cursed by God. For 7 years, Katherine steadfastly refused to concede her marriage was invalid. The Pope, reluctant to offend Catherine's powerful nephew, Emperor Charles V, delayed a decision, leaving Henry increasingly desperate. In 1533, Henry broke with the Catholic Church, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and annulled his marriage through his newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. By the time this formal declaration was made, Henry had already married Anne Boleyn. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was rooted in both necessity and romance, marked by hope for the future of the Tudor dynasty. Yet it ended in heartbreak, political upheaval, and the fracturing of Christendom in England. Catherine's dignity and unwavering faith throughout her trials remain a testament to her character, while the marriage's failure underscores the precarious balance of love, politics, and ambition in the Tudor court. The wedding ceremony of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. The marriage between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII stands as a pivotal event in history, not only for its immediate impact on the couple's lives, but also for the seismic shifts it prompted in the English monarchy and the wider world. Yet, despite its significance, the precise date of their wedding remains shrouded in uncertainty. Many records that could have shed light on their union were either lost to time or deliberately destroyed following Anne's execution in 1536, leaving historians with 2 primary dates to consider: November the 14th, 1532, and January the 25th, 1533. The earlier date, November 14th, 1532, is endorsed by chroniclers such as Nicholas Sander and Edward Hall, who assert that the couple married soon after returning from a critical diplomatic mission to Calais. This visit was marked by an important encounter with Francis I of France, who implicitly acknowledged Anne as Henry's consort. This recognition was not merely a personal victory for Anne, it was a significant diplomatic achievement that lent legitimacy to their union and bolstered their position against the backdrop of a deeply entrenched Catholic Church that opposed their relationship. Historian David Starkey aligns with the November date, arguing that it coincides with the beginning of the couple's intimate relationship. The importance of this date is further underscored by the fact that it also marks the day of Katherine of Aragon's marriage to Arthur Tudor in 1501, an event steeped in its own historical significance. The Protestant faction of the time, eager to support the legitimacy of Henry and Anne's union, often favoured the November date, as it implied that their daughter Elizabeth was conceived within the bonds of wedlock. Intriguingly, Sanders' support for the November timeline becomes all the more fascinating given his disdain for Elizabeth. Had he possessed any means to argue their illegitimacy, one might expect he would have exploited that opportunity. Conversely, the January 25th, 1533 wedding date presents another compelling narrative. According to historical accounts, the ceremony took place under the cover of darkness at Whitehall Palace in the early hours of the morning. The timing is particularly noteworthy because it coincided with a new moon, which may have been deliberately chosen to obscure the couple's movements from prying eyes. A chronicler of the period provides a vivid account of this secretive ceremony, suggesting that Henry pressured Dr. Rowland Lee into performing the service by misleading him about possessing a palpable dispensation. This detail adds another layer of intrigue to the story. Thomas Cranmer, who would later become the Archbishop of Canterbury, recorded in a letter that the marriage had occurred much about St. Paul's Day last, referencing the time around the end of January. He further noted that he only learned of the marriage 2 weeks after it happened, highlighting the clandestine nature of the event. The question of why there are two distinct dates is not merely academic, it raises broader issues regarding the nature of marriage during this period and the significance of official ceremonies. Some scholars propose that the November ceremony may have been more of a formal betrothal or commitment ceremony, allowing Anne to feel secure enough in her relationship with Henry to consummate it. Given the political climate, both Henry and Anne were under immense pressure to marry, and their intention to do so was widely recognised across Europe. Henry had already secured a papal dispensation allowing him to marry Anne, despite the scandal of having previously been involved with her sister, Mary Boleyn. Therefore, any dissolution of their relationship would have necessitated additional papal intervention. However, the idea that Anne would have engaged in a physical relationship with Henry without a formal marriage seems incongruous with her character. A woman of deeply held religious beliefs, Anne valued the sanctuary of marriage and the accompanying moral implications. Her steadfast nature makes it unlikely that she would have risked her reputation and her soul by sleeping with the king without the assurance of marriage. Likewise, Henry was acutely aware of the political ramifications of such a relationship. As a monarch intent on securing his legacy through legitimate heirs, he would have wanted to ensure that any children born to Anne were recognised as legitimate, born of an anointed queen. The urgency for a second marriage ceremony became apparent once it was confirmed that Anne was pregnant. Fearing that their initial secret wedding might not hold sufficient weight in the public eye, they decided to conduct another ceremony on the 25th of January 1533 on English soil. This time it was carried out in front of a select few witnesses, including prominent figures like Charles Brandon and Henry Norris. This choice further solidified their commitment to one another, while also addressing the need for public acceptance and legitimacy of their union. The secrecy surrounding the first wedding made it too obscure, and they wanted to ensure that this marriage was recognised. The couple slipped out of Whitehall Palace before dawn, cloaked by the dark of the moonless night, to reach the gatehouse where the second ceremony was held. This elaborate plan illustrates the intense scrutiny they faced and the lengths to which they were willing to go to safeguard their union. They intended for the secret to be revealed at an opportune moment, which they successfully orchestrated. By April of that year, the marriage was public knowledge and preparations for Anne's coronation were underway. Henry's approach to his relationship with Anne was nothing short of ambitious and revolutionary for the time. Not only did he marry her twice, but he also planned for her grand coronation, marking her as both consort and sovereign. This dual marriage symbolized Henry's desire to reshape the monarchy and establish a new line of succession, particularly as he was desperate for a male heir. The coronation of Anne Boleyn was staged with great pomp and circumstance, solidifying her position as queen in the eyes of the public and ensuring that their children would be considered legitimate heirs. Ultimately, whether one accepts November the 14th, 1532, or January the 25th, 1533, as the true date of their marriage, the significance of this union cannot be overstated. It set in motion a series of events that would lead to the English Reformation, the dissolution of monasteries, and the eventual break with the Roman Catholic Church. Anne's marriage to Henry VIII not only transformed their individual fates, but also marked a turning point in English history that would reverberate for generations. The complexities of their relationship and the secrecy surrounding their marriages illustrate the tensions and intricacies of political power, personal ambition, and religious conviction in an era of monumental change. Anne Boleyn's inability to produce a male heir left her vulnerable to the relentless scheming of her enemies at court. These adversaries, eager to restore favour with the king and eliminate Anne's influence, capitalised on her precarious position. Meanwhile, Henry VIII's attentions began to shift towards Jane Seymour, a quiet and demure lady-in-waiting, who embodied everything Anne's critics claimed that she was not: obedient, reserved, and unassuming. The early secrecy of Anne and Henry's union added to its precariousness. Few witnesses attended the clandestine wedding, and both the marriage and Anne's pregnancy were carefully concealed from public knowledge. It was not until Easter Sunday 1533 that the secret was formally revealed. On that day Anne appeared publicly in all the splendour befitting a queen, draped in jewels and resplendent in royal finery. She attended Mass in her closet, accompanied by a procession of 60 maids of honour. Having finally secured her place as Henry's wife and queen, Anne boldly adopted the motto, "The most happy," a declaration of her triumph. However, her happiness was tragically short-lived. Anne's reign as queen lasted just over 3 tumultuous years. Despite giving birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, in September 1533, Anne's subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriage, and she failed to deliver the long-desired male heir. This failure, in a court where alliances were fragile and power struggles present, left her isolated and increasingly exposed to intrigue. Her enemies seized upon her vulnerability, using Henry's growing interest in Jane Seymour as a lever to undermine Anne further. Whispers of Anne's supposed infidelities and conspiracies began to circulate, fomented by those who sought her downfall. She was accused of heinous crimes, adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, and plotting to assassinate the king. Though the charges were almost certainly fabricated, they provided the pretext that Henry needed to rid himself of his second wife. Anne Boleyn's dramatic fall from grace culminated in her execution on the 19th of May 1536, beheaded by a skilled French swordsman on Tower Green. She met her end with dignity and composure, her final words a prayer for the king. Her tragic fate, driven by her inability to secure the Tudor succession and the ruthless dynamics of Henry's court, remains one of history's most poignant examples of ambition, love, and betrayal. The wedding of Jane Seymour and Henry VIII. Jane Seymour's rise to prominence came swiftly and decisively. By May 1536, her place in Henry VIII's affections was undeniable, and the king was prepared to make her his third wife even before Anne Boleyn's tragic end. The affair between Jane and Henry had been gathering momentum since the previous autumn, with Jane embodying a striking contrast to Anne's fiery temperament. Demure, gentle, and seemingly submissive, Jane offered the king a promise of tranquility after years of marital strife. Henry was at Whitehall Palace when the cannon fire from the Tower of London signalled the execution of Anne Boleyn. The king wasted no time. That same day he arranged to be rowed to Chelsea, where Jane was waiting for him, ready to assume her new role. Jane's patience and discretion had paid off, winning her not only the king's heart, but also the ultimate prize, the crown. The Privy Council, acutely aware of this precarious state of the Tudor succession, had already urged Henry to remarry. Both Princess Mary, his daughter with Katherine of Aragon, and Princess Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, had been declared illegitimate, leaving the king without a legitimate heir. Jane's suitability as a potential queen, virtuous, obedient, and of impeccable lineage, made her the perfect candidate to fulfill the urgent need. On the same day that Anne Boleyn was executed, Henry announced his imminent betrothal to Jane to the council. The formal betrothal ceremony took place at Hampton Court the following morning, on May the 20th, 1536. The event was brief and subdued, reflecting the speed with which events had unfolded. Just 10 days later, on the 30th of May, Henry and Jane were married at Whitehall Palace in the Queen's Closet. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer officiated the ceremony, which was attended by a select group of courtiers and officials. Afterward, Jane made her first public appearance as Queen, enthroned beneath the canopy of state in the presence chamber, a visual declaration of her newfound status. Despite the celebrations, many observers found the rapid transition from Anne's execution to Jane's marriage unsettling. Within one and the same month that saw Queen Anne flourishing, accused, condemned, and executed, another was assumed into her place, both of bed and honour, remarked one courtier, reflecting the unease that such a swift replacement provoked. As Queen, Jane focused on her primary duty, providing Henry with the longed-for male heir. Her brief tenure as Henry's wife was marked by efforts to reconcile the king and his estranged daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, though her influence in these matters was limited by the king's own political concerns. Jane's demeanour as queen was modest, and she avoided the flamboyance and controversies that had characterised Anne's reign. Jane's greatest triumph came on the 12th of October 1537, when she gave birth to a healthy son, Prince Edward. The long-awaited arrival of a male heir was met with nationwide jubilation. Henry's joy was boundless, for this son secured the Tudor dynasty and fulfilled the king's deepest wish. However, the victory was bittersweet. Jane's health began to deteriorate shortly after Edward's birth. She succumbed to postnatal complications on the 24th of October, leaving Henry grief-stricken. Jane Seymour was the only one of Henry's 6 wives to be granted the honour of a queen's funeral. She was buried with great ceremony at Windsor Castle, and Henry chose to be interred beside her upon his death. Though her time as queen was brief, Jane's legacy was monumental. She not only gave Henry his long-desired male heir, but also left behind a memory of quiet dignity and success in fulfilling the role of a Tudor queen. Henry mourned her deeply, referring to her as his true wife, yet he quickly turned his thoughts to the future. Aware of the ongoing need to secure alliances and stability for his realm, he resolved to marry again. Jane Seymour's place in history, however, remained unique. She was the wife who succeeded where others had failed, delivering both a son and a fleeting glimpse of the domestic harmony that Henry had sought for so long. The unwanted marriage of Anne of Cleves and Henry VIII. Henry VIII is remembered as England's most married monarch, his 6 unions spanning from 1509 to 1543. But what were these weddings actually like? Modern royal weddings are synonymous with grand public celebrations, lavish processions, magnificent ceremonies in iconic venues like Westminster Abbey or St George's Chapel, and a Buckingham Palace balcony appearance. This tradition dates back only to Queen Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert in 1840. Before this, royal weddings, including those of Henry VIII, were often private, solemn occasions, held in royal chapels with little public display. When Henry VIII ascended to the English throne in April 1509, at just 17 years old, the political landscape of England was precarious. The Tudor dynasty, established by his father Henry VII, was still relatively new and far from secure. Surviving members of the rival House of York posed potential threats, their claims to the throne arguably stronger than Henry's own. The sceptre of the War of Roses, the bloody civil conflicts between York and Lancaster, continued to cast a long shadow. It was critical for the young king to cement his legitimacy by marrying and producing a male heir to secure the Tudor line. Anne of Cleves arrived in England in late December 1539 as Henry VIII's fourth bride-to-be, a match arranged by Thomas Cromwell to secure an alliance with the German Duchy of Cleves. Henry, eager for a diplomatic bond to bolster his position against France and Spain, initially supported the union based on the flattering portrait painted by Hans Holbein. However, his first sight of Anne proved to be an immediate and lasting disappointment. When Henry first met Anne informally at Rochester, disguised as a gallant suitor, his romantic gesture backfired. Expecting a joyful and warm reaction, he was met with polite indifference from Anne, who was unaware of his identity. Henry was not only insulted but also dismayed by her appearance, famously lamenting, "She is nothing so fair as she hath been reported." His physical revulsion was compounded by what he perceived as a lack of sophistication in her manners. From that moment he sought every possible means to escape the impending marriage. Despite his misgivings, political necessity forced Henry to proceed. On January 6, 1540, the day of the wedding, his mood was grim. "Is there none other remedy but that I must needs, against my will, put my neck in the yoke?" he muttered bitterly to Thomas Cromwell, whose career rested precariously on the success of this union. Still, Henry adhered to the outward demands of ceremony and appeared magnificently dressed in a furred gown of cloth of gold, adorned with silver flowers. His coat of crimson satin was slashed and embroidered, tied with diamonds and complemented by a rich collar of jewels. Anne, for her part, prepared diligently to fulfill her role as queen. She arrived at the chapel at Greenwich Palace, radiantly attired in a gown of rich cloth of gold, patterned with large pearl-encrusted flowers, reflecting her noble heritage and the splendour expected of a royal bride. Her golden yellow hair hung loose, a sign of maidenhood, crowned by a coronal studded with precious stones. Sprigs of rosemary, a symbol of fidelity and love, adorned her attire, while costly jewels graced her neck and waist. Preceded by Cromwell and escorted by German envoys, Anne walked with a composed and demure demeanour, making 3 low curtsies before the king. Together they entered the Chapel Royal, where Archbishop Thomas Cranmer awaited to officiate the ceremony. The wedding proceeded without objection. Both Henry and Anne declared that they knew of no impediment to the marriage, and Henry placed a ring on her finger, engraved with a hopeful motto, "God send me well to keep." Following the vows, they retired to the king's closet to hear mass, during which Cranmer blessed the couple and wished them a fruitful union. The service concluded with a kiss of peace from Cranmer to Anne, followed by a ceremonial kiss and embrace from Henry himself. The couple was then served wine and spices, as tradition dictated, and the day's festivities concluded honourably. That night, as was customary, Henry and Anne were ceremonially escorted to their marital bedchamber, where they were expected to consummate their union. The bedstead itself was an elaborate piece, adorned with carvings of cherubs symbolizing fertility and desire. Yet, despite the pageantry and symbolism, the marriage was not consummated. The following morning, Henry's dissatisfaction boiled over. He confided to Cromwell, "I abhor her. Surely, my lord, as you know, I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse. For I have felt her belly and her breasts, and thereby, as I can judge, she should be no maid." The king claimed to be so repulsed by Anne's physical attribute that he had neither will nor courage to engage in intimacy with her. He repeated similar grievances to other courtiers, suggesting his complaints were not merely an emotional reaction, but a calculated narrative to justify his desire to annul the marriage. Henry's complaints set the stage for the marriage's rapid dissolution. Anne, who had little power to protest, remained compliant throughout the ordeal. Despite her perceived shortcomings in Henry's eyes, she conducted herself with grace and dignity, qualities that later earned her the king's favour as his sister after their separation. Grounds for annulment were soon established, based on Henry's claims of non-consummation and his prior unwillingness to marry. By July 1540, the marriage was officially annulled. Anne of Cleves would go on to live a relatively peaceful life in England, enjoying a generous settlement and maintaining amicable relations with the king. For Henry, the marriage was a diplomatic embarrassment, and its failure contributed to the downfall of Thomas Cromwell, who was executed shortly after. Anne's brief tenure as queen may have been humiliating, but her pragmatic acceptance of her fate ensured her survival in a court fraught with danger. The wedding of Catherine Howard, the rise and fall of Henry VIII's fifth queen. Catherine Howard, a vivacious 19-year-old brunette, captured the aging King Henry VIII's attention at a time when his confidence and vitality were in decline. She was the niece of Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, one of England's most prominent Catholic peers. Norfolk, a seasoned political operator, saw Catherine as the perfect pawn in his ambition to re-establish Catholic influence at court. By positioning her to catch the king's eye, Norfolk and his faction sought to improve the reformist Protestant influence that had grown under Thomas Cromwell. Their gamble paid off spectacularly, for Henry quickly became infatuated with the young Catherine, who represented everything he craved in a queen: beauty, charm, liveliness, and the perceived innocence of youth. By the summer of 1540, Henry's fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves had been annulled, a humiliating debacle that left the king eager for a new beginning. Catherine Howard, with her flirtatious demeanour and youthful energy, was a stark contrast to Anne, whom Henry had famously found unattractive. The wedding, officiated by Edmund Bonner, Bishop of London, took place only 19 days after the dissolution of the king's marriage to Anne of Cleves. On the 28th of July 1540, the same day Thomas Cromwell was executed for treason, Henry married Catherine in a secret ceremony at the Palace of Oatlands in Surrey. Edmund Bonner, Bishop of London, officiated the intimate event, and for 10 days the marriage was kept under wraps. After this time, the marriage was announced in the usual way for the most of king's weddings. The bride was presented openly at court and prayed for during Mass across the country. Like with Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, King Henry attended the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court for the occasion. He had used Greenwich Palace for Katherine of Aragon and Anne of Cleves. This time, there was no dramatic walkouts during the Mass, unlike when people were abruptly asked to pray for the king and his wife, Queen Anne, instead of Queen Catherine. However, there were murmurs of discontent. Many English people preferred Anne of Cleves as a suitable queen over this new, young bride, though they weren't willing to resist openly. After the announcement, the king and his new queen embarked on a honeymoon progress, essentially a hunting trip through Surrey and Berkshire. They stayed in Reading before heading north. On their way back, they spent time at the moor with members of the King's Council. During this trip, official letters were carefully labelled to reflect whether they came from the council at court or the council in London. During the journey, the king adopted a stricter daily routine, which some, like the French ambassador, believed was an effort to lose weight. He rose between 5 and 6 a.m., attended Mass by 7, hunted early in the morning, and returned by 10 for dinner, spending his afternoons on royal business. By October, when the court returned to Windsor, Henry declared himself a new man, claiming that his leg no longer pained him, but sadly for the king, this improvement wouldn't last long. Henry, almost 50 years old and struggling with declining health, wanted time alone with his bride before presenting her to court. The aging king was besotted, convinced that Katherine was the embodiment of all the virtues he valued in a woman. He showered her with jewels, gowns, and titles, eager to display his prize to the world. For a time, Henry appeared rejuvenated, buoyed by the belief that he had found the perfect queen to restore his happiness and vitality. When Katherine was finally introduced as queen, she brought a sense of youthful exuberance to the court. She danced, sang, and charmed those around her, earning the nickname the Rose Without a Thorn from her adorning husband. Henry, now obese and plagued by a chronic ulcerated leg, revelled in her attention and doted on her incessantly. To him, she was a symbol of renewal, a balm for the failures of his previous marriages. And yet, while Henry basked in the glow of his bride's beauty and cheerfulness, Katherine's feelings about the marriage are less clear. She found herself bound to a man old enough to be her grandfather, whose physical condition was far from appealing. Despite her outward compliance, it is likely that Katherine, with her youthful passions, struggled to adapt to the demands of being married to such a domineering and troubled king. Unknown to Henry, Katherine harboured a scandalous past that would ultimately seal her fate. Before her marriage, she had engaged in sexual relationships with 2 men, her music teacher Henry Mannix and Francis Derham, a courtier who had served in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Both relationships were widely known among those who had lived in the Duchess's household, but the details were carefully concealed from the king. In 1541, whispers of Katherine's indiscretions began to surface. John Lascelles, a reformist with ties to the Protestant faction, brought forward testimony from his sister, Mary Hall, who had served in the Duchesses of Norfolk's household and knew of Katherine's past. The allegations reached Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who reluctantly informed the king. Henry, initially incredulous, demanded a thorough investigation. As evidence of Katherine's premarital liaisons came to light, it was also revealed that she had resumed contact with Francis Derham after her marriage. Worse, she had allegedly begun an adulterous affair with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. Letters between Katherine and Culpeper suggested a passionate and illicit relationship, further fueling Henry's rage. Henry was devastated. His belief in Katherine's purity had been shattered, and the betrayal cut deeply. In a rare display of emotion, the king reportedly broke down in tears during a council meeting, lamenting the loss of the woman that he adored. At one point, he called for a sword, declaring his desire to personally kill her for her treachery. His anger, however, soon gave way to the cold pragmatism of a ruler who cannot tolerate dishonour or disloyalty in his queen. Katherine was arrested and interrogated, though she denied consummating her affair with Culpeper. Both Culpeper and Derham were tortured and eventually executed, their heads displayed on London Bridge as a warning to others. Catherine's downfall was swift. In February 1542, she was brought to the Tower of London to face her fate. Too young and inexperienced to navigate the treacherous politics of the court, she lacked the allies or influence needed to save herself. On the 13th of February 1542, she was executed at the Tower Green. Before her death, she reportedly asked for the block to be brought to her so she could practice placing her head upon it, demonstrating a dignity that belied her youth. Catherine Howard's brief tenure as queen was marked by both joy and tragedy. For Henry, her betrayal was a bitter blow that left him disillusioned and further isolated. The tragedy of Catherine's execution lingered in the court's collective memory, a casting shadow over Henry's later years. Though her reign was short and her influence limited, Catherine remains a poignant symbol of youth and innocence, consumed by the ruthless demands of Tudor politics. For Henry, her death marked the loss of his final chance at romantic happiness, leaving him embittered and resigned to his declining years. The wedding of Katherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII. By 1543, King Henry VIII was nearing the end of his tumultuous matrimonial career. At 52, his health was in steep decline. His once vigorous frame had given way to obesity, his infamous leg ulcers festered, and his fiery temperament had been tempered by age and illness. Yet, despite his physical ailments, Henry retained his desire for companionship, and his gaze turned to Katherine Parr, a 30-year-old widow whose intelligence, composure, and gentle demeanour stood out in the intrigue-laden Tudor court. Katherine Parr was no stranger to marriage. Twice widowed, her first union had been to Edward Burr, a sickly young man who died after a short and uneventful marriage. Her second husband, John Neville, Lord Latimer, was considerably older and frail, though their union had been more contented. With Latimer's death in 1543, Catherine found herself a wealthy and independent widow, free to choose her next path. Her heart, however, belonged to Sir Thomas Seymour, a dashing courtier and brother to Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife. Henry, who was nothing if not perceptive, sensed the growing attachment between Catherine and Seymour. Unwilling to tolerate a rival for her affections, the king acted decisively. Seymour was sent abroad on diplomatic service, leaving Catherine no choice but to acquiesce to the king's courtship. It was not an offer that she could refuse. Henry's proposal was both a command and a matter of state, and though Catherine may have hoped for a life with Seymour, she resigned herself to royal duty. On the 10th of July 1543, Archbishop Tom Cranmer issued a special license for Henry and Catherine's marriage. The ceremony took place just 2 days later, in private, within the Queen's closet at Hampton Court Palace. Despite the intimate setting, the occasion was marked by joy and celebration. Lady Margaret Douglas, the King's niece, attended as Catherine's chief lady-in-waiting, and the court rejoiced at the union. When asked if he would take Katherine Parr as his wife, Henry responded, "Yeah," with what witnesses described as a joyful countenance. 20 people, including the King's daughters, Lady Mary and Elizabeth, gathered in the Queen's private room at Hampton Court Palace to witness King Henry VIII marry his 6th wife. The room was small, about 10 by 14 metres, making it an intimate setting. We don't know what time the ceremony happened or what Catherine wore, but Richard Watkins, the King's main court clerk, officially recorded the marriage. His record listed all the people present and noted that everyone supported the marriage. During the ceremony, the Bishop of Winchester asked the traditional vows, and the King replied, I, Henry, take thee, Katherine, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part, and I pledge to you my loyalty. Katherine then said her vows, promising to be loyal and loving in all ways, until death. After they exchanged rings and gifts of gold and silver, the bishop gave a blessing, and the king instructed the clerk to make an official record of the event. The vows were the same ones used at all of Henry's weddings and are still spoken in Anglican weddings today. There is no record of any celebration after the ceremony, suggesting it was a quiet event. Katherine was declared Queen of England that same day, but there was no grand entry into London or plans for a coronation. For Katherine, the marriage to Henry marked her third and most challenging union. She became not only a wife, but also a queen consort, a stepmother to 3 royal children, and a key figure in the intricate politics of the Tudor court. Katherine Parr quickly proved herself to be exemplary queen. Her charm, tact, and intelligence endeared her to the court and the royal family. She was particularly beloved by Henry's 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Katherine took an active role in their education, fostering a sense of unity and familial affection that had been long absent from the Tudor household. Her influence on the future Elizabeth I in particular was profound, as she nurtured the princess's intellectual curiosity and encouraged her pursuit of knowledge. At court, Katherine's presence brought a sense of calm and dignity. It was said that every day felt like Sunday under her stewardship, and unlike some of Henry's earlier wives, Katherine avoided the factional infighting that plagued the Tudor court, skillfully navigating the treacherous waters of politics and religion. In 1544, Henry prepared to lead a military campaign in France, a rare undertaking for a monarch of his age and condition. Recognizing Katherine's capabilities, he entrusted her with the role of Regent of England during his absence. This was no ceremonial title. Katherine was given full authority to manage the realm, sign official documents, and oversee the kingdom's defences. Katherine excelled in this role, proving her competence as leader. She maintained order in Henry's absence and ensured the stability of the realm, even as religious tensions and political intrigue threatened to disrupt the peace. Her regency solidified her reputation as a wise and capable queen, earning her the respect of the court and the people. And Katherine's intellect extended beyond governance. She was a devout and learned woman with a keen interest in religious reform. A staunch reporter of the Protestant cause, she engaged in theological discussions and authored several books. Her reformist views, however, put her at odds with conservative factions at court, and at one point her enemies attempted to turn Henry against her by accusing her of heresy. The king, who valued Katherine's loyalty and affection, ultimately dismissed the charges, but the episode served as a reminder of the perils of life of the Tudor court. Henry's marriage to Katherine Parr lasted nearly 4 years, longer than his unions with most of his other wives. During this time, Katherine provided the king with companionship, stability, and care as his health deteriorated. By the time of his death on the 28th of January 1547, she had become his most trusted confidant and steadfast presence in his final years. Henry left Katherine a wealthy widow, and she quickly remarried her former love, Thomas Seymour, just a few months after the king's death. Tragically, their marriage was short-lived, as Katherine died in 1548 following complications from childbirth. Katherine Parr's legacy endures as that of a queen who brought grace, wisdom, and compassion to a turbulent court, and she played a crucial role in uniting Henry's children and preparing them for their future roles in the Tudor dynasty. Her contributions to religious reform and her example of intellectual curiosity left a lasting impact on England's cultural and political landscape. More than any other of Henry's wives, Katherine Parr embodied the ideal of a partner who could provide not only companionship, but also strength and support during the waning years of a powerful but deeply flawed monarch.